Good morning, or afternoon, or whatever time you may be watching this recording. We are here today to do an employer onboarding regarding our brand new teacher apprenticeship program pilot that will be launching for the 24-25 school year. This is, of course, done in response to major workforce shortage, as we all know, for qualified teachers in the state of Alabama and across the country. And Governor Ivey directed us to create apprenticeship programs so that we can try to have a vehicle to allow working adults to be able to get into the teacher pipeline. We all know that, of course, students who are going through regular teacher ed programs frequently have to do internships and things that are unpaid. And that can be a barrier to somebody who is a working adult and has, bills to pay and families to feed and that kind of thing. So that's the point of this teacher apprenticeship. We hope that you have seen some of the previous material outlining it. We're going to do a quick recap and go over the employer and the sponsor's responsibilities so that you as an employer will feel comfortable as you're going into this program. And then we'll also talk about what's next that you need to do and how you can prepare for success in the upcoming. So always start with a recap of what are the 5 components of a registered apprenticeship program. Every registered apprenticeship has all 5 of these things. If it doesn't have these things, it's not an apprenticeship, no matter what anybody calls it. So the first thing is employer involvement. In Alabama, we always say that every registered apprenticeship starts with an employer who wants to train people to do that particular occupation. In this case, the employers are going to be the local school systems, but the employers were represented in the initial development of this program by members from the class, Council for Leaders in Alabama Schools. We had principals from there, and then also a group of superintendents from SSA. They're the ones that came together and advised us on some of the decisions that we made about who would be eligible, how should this program be arranged, and we really appreciate their effort and input as we set this up. The second component of every registered apprenticeship is structured on-the-job learning. So this is kind of the difference between most types of training programs versus an apprenticeship. Is a very heavy focus on the on-the-job learning. We believe that you can't learn how to do a thing any better than by doing it. So under the supervision of a trained journey worker, which is also sometimes called a mentor in education speak, under the supervision of a journey worker, this is the component of registered where the person learns how to do the things that make them proficient in the task. So the third item of a registered apprenticeship is related instruction. So related instruction is just another way of saying classroom work, or not necessarily in a classroom, virtual, whatever, but it's the book work that goes along with. If this first item, structured on the job, is what you have to be able to do, related instruction is what you have to know to do those things. So those two go hand in hand. You can't do either one of them in isolation. Our sponsor today, AUM, is also going to be both the sponsor and the related instruction provider. So we'll talk about how they play 2 roles in this particular apprenticeship program. The fourth component is rewards for skills gains. And what this basically means is as a person becomes more skilled, they make more money. And that's kind of the point of a registered apprenticeship program, particularly the kind that we're setting up here, is it makes a vehicle, it makes it affordable and accessible for people to be able to get into the training that they need to take advantage of the jobs that we need filled. And then the last component is a national occupational credential. So this is a federally registered program. It's managed through my office, the Alabama Office of Apprenticeship. When you complete any registered apprenticeship program, you get what's called a journey worker certificate. So every registered apprenticeship ends in that journey worker certificate, and it's portable and recognized in all 50 states and all territories. And that is not the same as a license, though. So in this particular apprenticeship program, you're going to wind up with 3 national recognized credentials. You'll get the credential from the Office of Apprenticeship, the Journey Worker Certificate. You get your degree from AUM, and then you'll also get a teacher certificate from the Alabama State Department of Education. So you'll be a well-certified, highly qualified individual when you complete this apprenticeship program. So those are the 5 components, and then here's some of the major roles to be played in a registered apprenticeship. The first is a registration agency. That's us, the Alabama Office of Apprenticeship. We're the ones that are charged with promoting and expanding all forms of work-based learning, including apprenticeship programs. But in this case, our job is to maintain quality assurance, and we provide guidance and technical assistance for everybody that's participating. The sponsor, in this case, AUM, the sponsor is the university in this apprenticeship program, but the sponsor has the role of overseeing the entire program. This is what we call a group program. So the sponsor is taking on a lot of the administrative responsibilities. They're the ones that will coordinate with my office. but they are governing the specific apprenticeship program. So this is AUM's Teacher Apprenticeship Program. Then under that sponsor, you can have multiple employers join. So as a group program, employers can come along and sign on, and I'll show you that APD or Employer Acceptance Agreement in a little bit. But the employers are looking at the program that AUM has designed under the registration agency's guidance, and they say, yes, we like that training outline. We want to have our people trained in that way, and they sign on under the sponsor. So then the next organization here is the related technical instruction provider. That's the person or group that is providing the coursework that goes along with the apprenticeship. And like I said, in this case, AUM is both the sponsor and the RTI provider. So they're going to be wearing two hats in this program. And then finally get to the apprentice. The apprentice, of course, is the product of this whole thing and really the tip of the spear. They're the most important aspect of this. The apprentice is looking back up this chain and getting support from the registration agency, the sponsor, the employer, and the RTI provider, so that we can support this apprentice in becoming successful and getting them into the job that we need them to fill. All right. Let's see. The roles in the apprenticeship program, and I think my Wi-Fi is lagging a little bit, so I'm going to turn myself off. You don't need to look at me. You probably enjoy not looking at me. There you go. All right, so the roles in the apprenticeship program, the sponsor, as we were saying, the sponsor is AUM, and they have a few different responsibilities. First, they are to ensure that the employer and the related instruction provider, which is themselves, are doing what they're supposed to do to provide a quality program. Now, the ensure word is important here. So the sponsor does not necessarily have to do everything that we're going to look at. They either have to do the thing or they have to make sure it's getting done. So for example, anti-harassment training, just for example, the sponsor has to make sure that everybody participating or being a part of the registered apprenticeship program, whether they're a journey worker, an apprentice, some kind of a supervisor, everybody who's related to that has to have anti-harassment training. That doesn't mean that AUM has to do anti-harassment training for every one of them. The local school system, who is the employer, may already be doing anti-harassment training. So there's no need to duplicate that. The sponsor just has to make sure that it is either doing it themselves or it is getting the work done. Of course, the sponsor is maintaining records. They're the ones that report and manage the administrative aspects of connecting my office. They ensure the periodic evaluations of the apprentice are getting done. We'll talk about those in detail. They will assess prior credit. So in this case, since it's a university program, this would be basically a transcript audit. If you're a transfer student or coming in, they're going to make an assessment to determine if the applicant has prior credit. They're going to also make sure the EEO responsibilities are getting done. Again, you see the word assign the EEO responsibilities. So who's going to do each of those things? Who's the point of contact? Who's the one that's going to be, making sure that the posters get up and all of that? Doesn't mean the university's doing all of that. It means that the university is either doing it or making sure it's getting done. They also can serve as a place where an apprentice, if they have a complaint, really, we always, and I'll say this multiple times because I know school systems worry about this and employers worry about this. We always counsel the apprentice to follow their chain of command, but there are sometimes that the problem is within their chain of command. So the sponsor can act as essentially an intermediary to come in and say, hey, I've got a complaint from an apprentice. They said, I don't know, they're not getting the right kind of technical instruction in the classroom, or they're not getting the opportunity to co-teach or whatever that is. The sponsor can help to, mediate that with the employer and the apprentice if they need to. And then again, they manage the reporting to my office. The related instruction provider, again, this is now the university, but with a different hat on. They're providing the related instruction, which is kind of what universities do, right? They're teaching their classes. They're making sure that the related instruction includes safety. They're tracking and reporting that related instruction, which just means in terms of transcripting and keeping up with who's had what classes and what other classes they need. And then they're maintaining qualified instructors, which is already a responsibility of a university anyway. Then you get to the employer. So the employer is responsible for providing that on-the-job learning. I will reiterate that probably a couple of times, but nobody except the employer is able to do the on-the-job learning assessments, right? So the employer is the one that's there in the field. They've assigned a journey worker that they have confidence in, and the journey worker is the one assessing the on-the-job learning. I emphasize this because it's a common point of confusion, especially when we talk about education programs. The idea, here's the way you have to do this kind of mental shift for an apprenticeship versus a regular, teacher ed program or any other program offered through a university. An apprentice is an employee first. So these are employees that the school system is sending for professional development, not students of the university who are being sent to the school to get some work experience. If you can make that mental flip, then the rest of this makes sense. Think of these as employees first for whom we're seeking professional development. So the employer is going to be doing that professional development both on the job and then making sure that the apprentice is getting their related instruction. Of course, they're going to make sure that the apprentice is kept safe and free from harassment. They're assigning a mentor, and this is a good place to point out the different terminology. In education, you hear the word mentor teachers and then mentors. You hear that a lot. And in apprenticeship, we say journey workers. A journey worker is the same thing as a mentor in this program, but we are going to use the term journey worker because we want to distinguish that this is a person who is supervising an apprentice versus a traditional mentor supervising an intern in a classroom. So these journey workers, these mentors will be called journey workers for the terms of the apprenticeship program. The ratio just means that you can't have more than one apprentice. This is a 1-to-1 ratio. So you can't have 2 or 3 apprentices in the classroom with one journey worker. It's always 1-to-1. We'll talk in detail about the wages. Of course, the employer is responsible for paying those, but also making sure that everybody's kept on the right step in their pay scale. And then the on-the-job learning, tracking, and reporting. Since the on-the-job learning is being evaluated by the employer, it's the employer's responsibility to track that. And we have an app for that, and we'll show you that right towards the end of the program. So just quickly, we're going to go through in detail the documents associated with this registered apprenticeship program, but just here's a preview so you can kind of get a mental map of what we're talking about. The first set of documents is called the standards. The standards is the overarching document that created AUM as a sponsor of apprenticeship programs in general. So they had to apply to our office to become a sponsor. They had to demonstrate that they had the ability and the willingness to comply with the components of a registered apprenticeship program. That's all done in the standards. So big umbrella organization document for the standards. Then you get more specific with what's called an Appendix A or a work process. So those two terms are used interchangeably, Appendix A and work process. The Appendix A document details the specific training that goes with a certain occupation. So AUM is going to be doing both high school teachers and elementary teachers, and we'll look at those two different work processes. It's important to note that each Appendix A is unique from each other. So it's a different training outline, which just makes sense. It's a different training outline for high school teachers versus a training outline for elementary teachers. Different set of courses, all of that, kind of different timing. That means that the next document, which is called the Employer Acceptance Agreement or Appendix D, the next document you have to do if you're a school system. Let's just say that Laney School System wants to train high school teachers and elementary teachers through AUM. Then they're going to need to, Laney School System is going to need to sign multiple employer acceptance agreements. Because what I'm saying here when I sign that employer acceptance agreement is, hey, I've reviewed the training outline for high school teachers in that work process. I like it. I agree to follow it, and I want to join under that particular program. If I also have reviewed and like the elementary one and I want to join under that, I need to do a second employer acceptance agreement. So these two occupations are very similar in their training outlines, but they are different jobs. So you do need to look at those two training outlines and join them independently. And then the third item here is called a 671 or an apprenticeship agreement. So this is the document that the apprentice will sign all the way over at the end of this program. And the apprentice is going, hey, I've looked at the training outline. I've looked at the wages that are being proposed by my employer. I've looked at what I'm committing to do and what my employer and sponsor are committing to do for me. And yes, I'm signing on to this. Until a person has completed that 671, and it's gotten put into the database, which is called Rapids. Until all of that is done, they're not a registered apprentice. So that's a very critical document, and we'll talk in detail about that, and we'll take a look at an example. So we're going to jump out of the PowerPoint for a minute and go to several of those documents that I just mentioned and look at them in detail. So here's the first one, and I'll make that a little bigger so you can see that more easily. The first one is Registered Apprenticeship Standards. So this is the one that I said established AUM as a sponsor and able to supervise multiple kinds of registered apprenticeship. I'm not going to read you this whole thing, but I want to show you a few key items of the sponsor shall. When you say, all right, well, what's the sponsor supposed to do? Right here, page 2, responsibilities of the sponsor. Number 1, the sponsor shall ensure adequate and safe equipment facilities. So again, this is an ensure. It doesn't mean that the sponsor has picked up new obligations to do some kind of audit on the school or come check for safety. They're not going to come look at the dates on your fire extinguishers. They just have to be assured that the place they're sending their apprentice is safe. That is the responsibility of both the employer and the sponsor. They've just got to make sure that it's getting done. If, for example, the employer was, and this is a crazy hypothetical, but just for an example, if the employer was unable to provide a safe work environment for the apprentice, the only enforcement authority that the sponsor has is to say, look, I keep hearing from the apprentices that they're unsafe in the following way. You got them teaching classes on the roof. It's unsafe. They can't keep doing that. Employer, if you can't meet these obligations, you won't be able to stay a part of this apprenticeship program, right? So there's no punitive, empowerment for the sponsor and the employer relationship. It's just that if the employer can't do the things that are associated or won't do the things that are associated with the obligations of the apprenticeship, then the sponsor can say, hey, employer, you know what? You're going to have to go and get apprentices from some other school because you keep endangering the apprentices or whatever it is. All right. Item 2, ensure there are qualified training personnel and adequate supervision on the job. So it is the responsibility of the sponsor to make sure this is getting done. The sponsor is going to make sure, of course, since they are also the RTI provider, the sponsor is going to make sure that the teachers in the classrooms at the university are qualified, but they're also going to make sure that when the apprentice is assigned to a journey worker, that journey worker is qualified to supervise apprentices. And I'll say this again later when we get to the details, but the qualifications for a journey worker to supervise an apprentice are the exact same as the qualifications for an intern supervisor. So we didn't want to confuse things. We kept those exact same qualifications. Number 3 and 4, really, and 5, all of those are about record keeping. And I just want to say quickly that the responsibility for record keeping is a joint responsibility. You'll see in here a couple of times this 45-day requirement. If anything changes about the apprenticeship, if the apprentice quits or gets fired or whatever, if some status change occurs in this apprenticeship, the employer has to let the sponsor know. I mean, how would the sponsor know if the employer released the apprentice if they didn't tell them? The reason the employer has to let the sponsor know is because the sponsor has to let my office know. So in the standards and according to the Code of Federal Regulations, within 45 days, my office has to be updated on any changes in status of the apprentice or the apprenticeship program in general. So I just use that as a point to say there has to be an ongoing good line of communication between the employer contact and the sponsor contact. That's critically important, that you have somebody there at the local school system who is serving as the primary point of contact, and they know, hey, if an apprentice quits or something doesn't work out and we move them back to a different position, we've got to make sure to keep the sponsor updated because they have an obligation to update the Office of Apprenticeship. Number 7, the periodic review. We'll talk about that in detail, but the point being, and you see here the term arrange for a periodic review. That's what the code calls for, but it doesn't specify what the period is. So it could be every 4 weeks. It could be every 6 weeks. It could be once per month or semester or whatever makes sense, but there has to be a formal periodic review of the apprentice's progress. This is a 3-way communication here. You've got the sponsor, the employer, and the apprentice who have to sit down, or not necessarily sit down, but have some kind of communication, virtual or even email, say, hey, this is how you're doing in the classroom. This is how you're doing with your on-the-job learning competencies. Do you have any feedback for us? And then, of course, everybody has to be provided a copy of all of these documents. So if a person comes along and says, hey, I want to be an apprentice, make sure that they have at least had the opportunity to look at the standards and the App A and what they're signing on for. Because most of the time, if we have apprentices who wind up getting out of the apprenticeship program, it's because they didn't really understand what they were signing up for in the beginning. This is a rigorous program. The one that we've outlined here, this is going to require apprentices to work full-time and essentially go to school full-time. The university is doing everything they can to make the classes convenient, nights and weekends and virtual asynchronous and that kind of stuff. But it is a full load. So This, just say this one more time. I know I've said it before, but this is not for people who are barely able to pass their college classes. This is for your high flyers who just need an opportunity to get the time and finance barriers out of their way so they can go become teachers. And then, of course, maintaining the records. The minimum qualifications are set in the Appendix A for each occupation, and we'll look at that document next. That's the work process. We already mentioned credit for previous experience and credit for previous coursework. That'll be evaluated at the time of application by the sponsor and the employer. Talked about the ratio. We will look at the wage schedule. It's in both the App A and the App D. That's the work process and the employer acceptance agreement. In the standards, there is an equal opportunity pledge. On this one, it spills over between 2 pages. But the university has committed that they will adhere to this equal opportunity pledge. Every employer that is signing on under the university is thereby saying that they will also adhere to this equal opportunity pledge. In the local school systems, frequently you have lots of non-discrimination clauses that you're required to use on different things and different documents. I always think about the one for Perkins. If you're putting out information about Perkins, you have to use a certain a certain equal opportunity pledge. This is a separate one. So notice that it's specifically talking about will not discriminate against apprenticeship applicants or apprentices. So you will have to use this one if you're talking about apprenticeship documents. You can't just say, oh, well, we've got our standard EEO pledge, language on there. Affirmative action plan will be done by the university. I hesitate to even bring this up, but the reason I'm pointing it out is because some school board attorney is going to see this and panic, or some school board member or superintendent. Each employer does not do an affirmative action plan, and by joining this program, you're not tying your local school system to create an affirmative action plan. The sponsor creates one affirmative action plan, and that is done 2 years after they register their 5th apprentice. So my office and the university will create a registered apprenticeship. We'll create an affirmative action plan so that we are making sure that the apprentices are getting a fair shake at applying and everybody's being treated equally. This is not a 1970s version of an affirmative action plan. There are no quotas. There are no punitive actions. This is really about making sure that we've got good recruitment efforts going on. Speaking of recruitment, the next section defines selection procedures, but for each program, those are in the work process. So I'll show you those in the work process next. There is a complaints section here, and it talks about who you should contact, which now that I'm looking at this, Brooke, we've got to update this because Kelly's not there anymore, but that's okay. We can update that. So we'll update that for general complaints. So this general complaints thing is, hey, my journey worker is not letting me participate in the co-teaching of the class, or the scheduling is not working and I've got a problem. So we always encourage these apprentices, go through your normal chain of command, talk to the folks at the school level, talk to the folks at your employer level, but they can go to the sponsor if they've got a complaint about the apprenticeship program. The second one here, though, complaints regarding discrimination. Generally speaking, every apprentice is treated just like any other employee of the school system. They're just an employee of the school system. They don't get any extra rights, or, some people think, well, if I make them an apprentice, I can't fire them. No, that's not true. They're just an employee just like everybody else. You treat them just like everybody else. If you need to do progressive discipline or anything like that, you do it just like you would any other employee. One place where they get one additional right is in this section about complaints regarding discrimination. So because this is a federally overseen program through my office, if an apprentice feels like they are being discriminated against, they do have the right to bring a complaint about that straight to my office. They don't have to go through the employer. They don't have to go through the sponsor. They can bring that straight to my office. My office has the authority to investigate these or to pass them on to the EEO. We'll follow the regular federal standards for investigating complaints of discrimination. But this is as far as I can think of, really the one place where an apprentice gets additional kind of employment rights beyond what a regular employee would. And that kind of makes sense, because if you think about it, well, what if the problem was with the sponsor? If you told them they had to go through the sponsor first regarding a complaint about discrimination, that could be a problem. So that's why they're given the opportunity to come straight to us. Here is contact information for my office, Meredith Smith, who's on this call. There's her email and phone number if you need to get a hold of her for anything. And then the rest of this is about reciprocity, and then here's your signatures. All right, so that's the overall standards document. That is the thing that establishes the university as a whole, being the sponsor of the apprenticeship. So now let's look at details about these particular occupations. Those will be found in the work process. Every one of these documents should be made available to apprentice applicants or anybody who thinks they want to be an apprentice. But if somebody really wanted to hone in on, well, what am I signing up for? This work process, also called the Appendix A, this is the primary document they need to be taking a look at, because it really details the training and the everything they would be signing up for. All right, so this one is for the high school program, but we'll look at both high school and elementary. They are essentially the same. This is a competency-based program, meaning that the measure of the on-the-job learning success is done in terms of competencies, evaluated by the journey worker. There happen to be 96 of those competencies. This says that supplemented by not less than 1,000 hours of related instruction. That's a general number because every apprentice's number may be slightly different depending on how much prior credit they have when they come in the door. The apprentice to journey worker ratio I've already mentioned is 1-to-1. Here you see the wage schedule. In this case, it just talks in terms of percentages. So during year one, the apprentice can expect to make 65% of the entry-level teacher salary. So there are no dollar amounts here. That's because we didn't want to have to go back and change this if the legislature gives you a raise or something along those lines. This one doesn't have dollar amounts, but it does just set the base. So no employer can participate in this program if they're not willing to pay at least 65% of the entry-level teacher salary to an apprentice in year one. And then in year two, it jumps to 85%. So to get from level 1 to level 2, the apprentice needs to know that this is what you have to do to move up. So you got to demonstrate fundamentals in all the competencies, and you must have successfully completed the coursework prescribed by the institution through the end of the spring semester. So when the apprentice gets in, they're going to work directly with the university. They're going to be given a program of study. All right, this is what you need to take each term so that you can stay on track and get to where you need to be and graduate on time. They've got to be on time with their coursework, but that, again, could be different for every different apprentice depending on how much prior credit they come in the door with. And then for year two, it's the same kind of thing, but now they've got to demonstrate proficiency. And to get from year two to completion, they've got to demonstrate proficiency. They got to complete all of the coursework, meaning they got to be ready to graduate, and they've got to apply for and obtain a regular teacher certificate. So during this process, while they are in year one and year two, they will have a teacher apprentice license from the State Department. But once they get done with their training and they've graduated and gotten their bachelor's degree, they apply for a regular Class B teaching certificate, and that's what gets them to their 100% salary. So in the first year of their regular employment, they're obviously making regular money. This probationary period here sometimes confuses employers, has nothing to do with them being like a probationary employee or anything along those lines. What it is, it's talking about the apprenticeship program specifically. So let's say you've got an aide or a school secretary or somebody who gets into the apprenticeship program. You think they're going to be good. They think they're going to be good, but then it just turns out, hey, this is not working out. Something in my life has changed and I'm not going to be able to do these classes or whatever it is. If an apprentice leaves the apprenticeship program within the first 6 months, then that apprentice doesn't count against the university's completion rate. That's all that probationary period is. It does not have really anything to do with their employment status. So I just wanted to clarify that. You're not saying that they're a probationary employee for 6 months. They're a probationary apprentice for 6 months. And it's really just about completion rates for the university. The minimum qualifications here are spelled out for this occupation, pretty straightforward. You got to be 18 in the age category. This is really the primary thing to look at for this program is the education requirements. So it's 2 parts. The apprentice has to have sufficient transferable, acceptable college credit hours. We couldn't think of any more adjectives to put on that. They've got to have acceptable college credit hours to be within 2 academic years of completing the bachelor's degree in the approved teacher prep program. So this can only really be determined through a transcript review. You can, through the complete official application process, there'll be an official transcript review, but we do encourage any person considering applying to directly contact the university. You can contact Brooke, or Dr. Derek Smith and say, hey, I'd like to get just a feel. Here's my unofficial transcript, or here's my official. Do you think I'm within 2 years? And that's going to be, again, different for every single person. So, but that's the first thing that has to be determined. And then the second is confirmed eligibility to be enrolled in the approved teacher prep program. So not only do you have to have enough credits to be within 2 years to graduate, you got to be able to get into AUM's College of Education, into their teacher ed program. Now, there are sometimes GPA requirements, and when we get to the end, Brooke can talk about those, whatever those additional requirements are. But it's possible, let's just think about a hypothetical here. Maybe you've been taking classes, or the applicant has been taking classes, they got enough credits, but every one of their credits was at a, barely passing score. So their GPA is not high enough to get into the College of Education. So that's what those two kind of characteristics mean there. You got to have enough credits, and you got to have credits that meet the minimum requirements that will get you into the College of Ed. The physical is your standard thing that the apprentice has to be able to do the job with or without accommodations and do it safely. And then there are a few other items here. The others are the things that it takes to get a teaching certificate from the State Department. So you got to do a background check, citizenship verification, and have a valid Social Security number. So the next section here talks about the selection procedures. So this is how an apprentice would be selected. We're going to skip all of this because this is if you were doing hiring off the street. And for this program, we're not hiring off the street. Everybody who's getting in has to be an incumbent worker, somebody who already works for the employer. So we're going to skip down to section 3. That process is called direct entry. So this is how you would get an apprentice if they are, they've got to be working for you as a direct entry program. So this is a real quick overview of the process by which somebody would become an apprentice through direct entry. The related instruction provider will evaluate the employee's transcript. The employer will evaluate the employee's skills to see if they got any prior credit for OJL. And the sponsor will evaluate the employee's application for satisfaction of minimum qualifications. We'll go through that application in detail in just a second. But the big takeaway from this is, and I've been asked a bunch of times already, can I hire people off the street? Can I get new applicants to come into this? No. And the reason for that is because we are investing a lot of state dollars to support these people, and we want really good retention rates. We want you to be pouring local school system money into people that you know, and state money into people that you know. So they do have to be current employees. All right, so then we get into the part that is the specific training outline for, this one is for, you see here, secondary teachers, except special ed and career tech. And you've got the competencies here. So the competencies you'll recognize if you're, all of your education people, you'll recognize the competencies are written in apprentice will be able to, observable action verb, right? So that's how we write competencies, just like you write lesson plans. The apprentice will be able to confer with staff members outside of content area to plan, schedule lessons, etc. And then you see on the right-hand side, these columns, field training, demonstrates fundamentals, and proficient in task. Field training means that they have had some training in it from their on-the-job learning supervisor, their journey worker. They've maybe done it a little bit with them, co-teaching maybe. They've observed it essentially, and they understand the concepts. Demonstrates fundamentals means that person has done it under the supervision of the journey worker, possibly with a little bit of assistance, but the journey worker has checked them off and decided, yep, you've got this down to the fundamentals. And then finally, proficient in task means they are totally proficient in this and they can do it without assistance or extra supervision. So you'll recognize those 3 columns from the wage progression all the way back up here. So for an apprentice to move from year 1 to year 2, they have to have completed all of the competencies and checked off in first 2 columns. Now, we're not going to check these off on paper. We'll show you how we're going to do that. But that's what they have to satisfy competency-wise to move from year 1 to year 2. And you will see in this particular program, there are 96 of these competencies. They are aligned with the ATOT. So those of you employers, already using the ATOT, the only additional thing that is on there besides what's on the ATOT is this first section, which is employability skills. That's something that the superintendents and principals that initially worked with us to develop this felt strongly about, that they wanted to capture some of these things like displaying professionalism and strong work ethic. they wanted to capture some of that stuff. It felt like it was critically important to the success of an apprentice. So those are the competencies, and that's what you got to be able to do. Well, then here's what you got to know to do those things. So this is the related technical instruction outline. So this is the overall list of courses. You'll see here's a key right here for the different delivery methods. So competency-based assessment or face-to-face or field experience, etc. When you go to the actual list of courses, note this one is for secondary English language arts. So this is a generic list of courses. This would be customized for each of the apprentices based on what they already have credit for or what they still need to take. The important column right here is the delivery method. The university added this for us so that an apprentice would have a good idea of what they were signing on to. So you see right here that this one, Social Foundations of Education, is going to be delivered both face-to-face and through a competency-based assessment. Just because it says face-to-face doesn't mean it's during the school day. Brooke can maybe talk about that if we get to the end. We have a little time about that. But point being, the university is trying to make this work for working adults. So most of these face-to-face are going to be nighttime or weekends or something like that, so that you can do this without having to miss your work day. And employers, that's important for employers because they don't want to have to be getting a lot of coverage for apprentices to be gone to go take their classes. And so you can see all of that list of courses. I'm not going to go through that. And then the second one here, this one is for secondary social sciences. So both of those are the course list for those two occupations. You would sign as an employer if you want to do high school teachers in social science or I forgot the other one, social science or English. Then you would sign one employer acceptance agreement to sign on to this Appendix A. Brand new on the scene is also the option to do elementary education. So the same competencies apply because those are all general competencies about being a teacher. But of course, it's a different list of classes. So you can see this is the newly added, and this is not even up on the landing page yet, but we'll get it up there. This is a newly added course outlines for elementary teacher. You note right here that this face-to-face has a special little asterisk spot. As an employer, you may need to work with the university to release the apprentice during that second year to go to the university something like 3 to 4 days during the semester to work on their Ed TPA. University will work with the employer to be as flexible as possible on that. We're not going to be pulling them out of the classroom a whole bunch, but if they don't pass their Ed TPA, then they're not going to get a certificate and they're not going to be any good to anybody. So this brings up a good point here about the coordination between the employer and the sponsor. We've got to work together. The employer and sponsor have got to work together to make sure that these kind of scheduling things and all are working so that we're not putting an undue burden on the employer and we're not putting the apprentice in a situation where they just, they're overwhelmed and have no chance to pass. Everybody's goal in this has to be to make this apprentice successful, competent, and fully trained so that everybody benefits on the other end of this program. One of the things that we've heard from our peers across the country who are doing apprenticeships for teachers, if you have, as an employer, if you have the opportunity to carve out some time during the school day for the apprentice to study, so if you're just, for example, if you're on a 7-period day, typically the apprentice is going to have a planning period anyway. We're not talking about their planning period. If you couldn't afford to give them one additional period during the day to study, and that's their assignment so that they can get some work done, we're hearing from folks that are doing this that is a big difference maker in the success of the apprentices and just keeps them from feeling overwhelmed and keeps them, on track and successful in their coursework. It's not a requirement. I do recognize that if you're running a block schedule for a high school, that's a big commitment to say, well, I'm going to give them a planning block, but I'm also going to give them a study block. But consider it, especially during that final semester of the second year, consider it, because they really got to have time to work on that Ed TPA and all of that. And they'll be teaching classes. So, if they're on a block and you have to lose one block out of the whole year extra, I think that's a reasonable investment to make sure that your apprentice is successful. So that is the APA, those two parts, and there'll be two separate ones, one for high school, one for elementary. Those outline the training for the specific program. And each employer who wants to use those, again, has to join using an AppD for both of those things. So how do you join? Well, the next document is called the Appendix D Employer Acceptance Agreement. Some of you have already signed one of these and sent it in through the university. Some of you haven't. The rest of these documents will be on the landing page at alapprentice.org/teacher, but the Employer Acceptance Agreement is not, and that's on purpose. There's a draft up there, but we're not putting the official document up there because we didn't want the wrong, a teacher or somebody signing this thing on behalf of a school system. So what is the Appendix D? What is the Employer Acceptance Agreement? Well, it says that the foregoing undersigned employer is agreeing to participate under AUM's sponsorship for this apprenticeship program and follow the training outline and follow the rules as defined in both the standards and the APA. It goes on to say then that on the job, the apprentice is guaranteed assignment to a skilled and competent journey worker. So you got to make sure you put them with somebody who meets the requirements, and is guaranteed that the work assigned to the apprentice will be rotated. So what does this mean? Rotated to ensure training in all phases. If we go back over to the competencies, all we're saying here is don't have your apprentice working always in these particular group of competencies, but you never give them an opportunity to practice, choosing resource materials. It is the job of the employer and the journey worker to make sure that the apprentice is getting trained in all of the competencies. When you hear people here rotate, they think, does that mean move them from one class to another, move them from one teacher to another? No, it just means to make sure that they're not always, only writing lesson plans and never getting to deal with learners with exceptionalities. You gotta make sure that they're covering all of the bases in their OJL. Next, get back to this document. Next is the employer agrees to abide by the policies of the AOA, including but not limited to the living wage requirements, which you all are paying well above this requirement. But just so you know, what that means is my office has a policy that says that no apprentice can be making less than $15 a year. I'm sorry, $15 an hour after 1 year of employment. That's the living wage policy for our office. Also, provide for cost of training associated with the apprenticeship, commonly referred to as the last dollar scholarship. So let's just pause here for a second. There is money, we're going to talk about that next. There's money from the legislature to offset the cost of an employer participating in this program, but it is not intended to be a free program. There's no such thing as free. A registered apprenticeship program is the employer's investment in their apprentices. So you do have to be prepared as a local school system once you have used up or completely utilized whatever incentive funds we're able to provide you from my office. If there's some cost associated with that apprentice, the employer is committing to pay that. Now, people say, well, how much is it going to cost me? Well, do the math. You've got the wages that you're going to pay them for year one. You've got the cost of their related instruction, which may be a little different for each independent apprentice, but you can work with AUM to get a ballpark price if you wanted for that particular apprentice. How much does each class cost and how many classes does that apprentice need to take? You've got the stipend for the journey worker, and then you've got, just your other associated costs for having an employee, whatever those benefits are and all that. Just want to make it abundantly clear, this is not a free program for any employer. And that doesn't just mean for this education one. This program is not free to any employer. It's an employer's investment in their people, and you don't get a return on an investment you don't make. So you got to be prepared and understand as an employer what you're committing to. Next section here is just pretty basic employer information. Please do fill out the EIN number. We need that, and we don't want to have to call you back and get it. I don't know why people leave that one blank a lot. As far as the contact information, this does not need to be the superintendent. Okay. I guess if you're in a small school system or you've got a superintendent who just wants to be the main point of contact for this, that's fine. But as an employer, you need to find somebody who is going to be the touch point inside your district for apprentices or for AUM or for me. If we need to call somebody at the school system and say, hey, we need to talk about this or that or the other related to the apprenticeship, we need a person who is fully briefed and knows what's going on. Please don't just assign this to somebody who doesn't know and hasn't participated in any of the trainings. But we don't necessarily need the superintendent right here. So give us your point of contact who's going to be the lead for this in your district. Then down here, we cover the minimum qualifications. Again, this is the same thing that you saw in the other document. There are no extra minimum qualifications besides being 18 and following those minimum qualifications that we discussed with the education. This is a generic draft. And then you get to the progressive wage. So now you finally see dollar amounts. In the other, in the App A, it was just the percentages. Now you got dollar amounts. These dollar amounts are coming from the current base teacher pay scale. These would be, of course, updated if the base teacher pay changes. But a big important note about wages and wage discussions. So this is the only place, the only document where the employer will spell out their particular wages. Of course, the employer is sharing their wage information with the sponsor when they register. They're also sharing it with my office when you register. It is perfectly acceptable for the employer and the sponsor and the employer and the Office of Apprenticeship and the employer and the apprentice to have conversations about the wages. Everybody needs to know what the wages are going to be. It is not okay. It is a violation of federal law. It is anti-competitive behavior and falls under the antitrust rules enforced by the Department of Justice. Employers may not have conversations between themselves. So employer A and employer B cannot have conversations about what they're going to pay apprentices in a registered apprenticeship program. The idea is that employer A may pay standard 5% above whatever the state minimum is. There are school systems out there that do that. Where employer B, they always just pay the standard. And so what the Department of Justice is looking at in this is they don't want a group of employers to collude and say, hey, let's all agree to an anti-poaching agreement and we're going to suppress the wages and everybody only pay the floor, right? So that is illegal. That's anti-competitive. Nobody here is going to do that intentionally, but it doesn't matter whether you do it intentionally. Be very careful anytime we're having these group conversations about apprenticeship programs. Don't discuss specific wages between employers. Okay, so I think I've hammered that enough. Then the signature block here, we do want the superintendent to sign off on this signature block. So when the employer is signing off, please get the employer signature to be the superintendent. Then you will send that once it's completed and you fill this out and it's signed by the superintendent. You will send that to the sponsor. That's AUM. The sponsor will review it, make sure everything's complete. They'll sign it, and then they'll send it to me. Then that kicks us into the next step of the process. All right, so next step of the process is unique to this particular apprenticeship program. There is, as we've said, incentive money available from the legislature to support this. It is a total of $2.4 million for the first cohort. So that will help us fund a total of 40 apprentices in the first cohort. In order to access those funds, I'm sure in your local school systems, you all have a process where vendors need to become, they need to get registered in your system. They got to become a vendor in your system so that you could cut them a check at some point. There is a process like that here. AIDT, Alabama Industrial Development Training, is the fiscal agent for my office. So one of my staff, Amy Brown, whose email address is right there, will guide you through the process of getting set up as a vendor. This pre-qualification sheet requires some attestations. So if you're going to get access to the state dollars that are being provided to incentivize this program, you've got to commit to do a few things. The first is you got to say that you understand that completion is not a guarantee of funding. So you are pre-qualifying, essentially getting in line for some of the state dollars. It does not guarantee that you're going to get state dollars. Now we do have it. We know we've got it. We've got it sitting in the account right now for this year. But we always have to put, just like you all do, based on availability and continued allocation by the Alabama legislature. So funding availability in year 2 is depending on whether the legislature renews us for that or not. We have every confidence that they will. Second block here says that they understand, or you understand, that the final determination of a person becoming an apprentice is not done until it's all the way through the process. They've been approved by all parties. That includes the sponsor, the employer, my office, and in this case, the State Department of Education, and they've been registered. We're going to look at that document next, registered by the Alabama Office of Apprenticeship. One of the requirements, if you accept the state dollars, is that you will pay your journey worker a stipend. You are going to give them some additional responsibilities. They've got additional responsibilities. They ought to get paid for them. So the minimum stipend for the first year is $3,500 for the journey worker, $2,500 for the journey worker in the second year. Some questions have been asked about, do I have to give that to them all at once? Do I give it to them over the course of the academic year? Doesn't matter to us. However, whatever makes sense in your payroll system, we're going to give you the money up front. Once you qualify and you've got apprentices and you get your money, the school system, the employer is going to get their incentive money in one lump sum, $40,000. But then you're going to pay out from that your related instruction or the journey worker pay and whatever costs you can put towards the wages, all of that. This one here says, I understand that the incentive funds are meant to offset. So this is basically a repetition of, I do understand that I may have to commit some dollars to this program. The next one is that the LEA may not require a work commitment. So a work commitment is where you'd say, all right, we're going to put you through an apprenticeship program. Takes 2 years to complete this. You have to work for us for 2 years after you complete the program, or else you have to pay us the money back. You can't do that if you take the state dollars, because you're getting state incentive funds to offset those costs. So you can't have work commitments for the apprentices if you're using state dollars. The LEA will require the workers, all journey workers, to participate in training provided by the AOA. So my office will coordinate a training. We'll do it during the summer. We're school people. We understand that people are off contract and they're on vacation and all that. So we will make it as accessible as possible. And we'll talk about that in a little detail. A preliminary review of the potential apprentices has been done, and you think you have some candidates. So you don't have to guarantee that you have candidates, but you've at least bothered to go look around and say, hey, do I have anybody that'd be interested and probably could get through and do this program? Then, of course, you can ask for either 1 or 2 apprentices. Pretty much everybody's asking for 2, but if you don't need to, please don't, because what you're doing here is getting in line. So once you complete this, and this is why it's important to do that Appendix D and this pre-qualification as soon as you can. Once you complete this, that puts you into essentially a rank order of pre-qualified school systems. Once we have pre-qualified funding for 40 apprentices, then you go on to a waiting list. So when we get through that process, we're not going to tell you, no, you can't get on the list. You can still pre-qualify. If you are pre-qualified and you're in spot number 5 out of the 40, and it comes time to start allocating these funds and you don't have any apprentices, then the funds are going to roll down to the next LEA in line. So there is a time sensitivity, I guess, is my point. You need to be doing this as quickly as you can. All right, so you complete that in pre-qualification. The way this works is when you complete the employer acceptance agreement, you're sending it to the sponsor. Sponsor is sending it to me. I'll send you a, hey, congratulations, you've joined, email, and it will have this document attached and instructions about how to complete it. And you'll work with my incentives manager, Amy Brown, will guide you through that process. So then the next thing you need to do is find some apprentices and start getting applications from apprentices. So this apprenticeship application is laid out in stages. This is a multi-step application. The first part is to be completed by the applicant, right? So this is the person who is applying to become an apprentice. The very first is just it's basic demographic information. All of this is stuff we need to put them into the apprenticeship database later if they are selected. So they do need to fill all of that stuff out. Social Security number, we don't need that in my office for them to become an apprentice, but the State Department of Ed does need it to be able to issue them a license later. So if the apprentice doesn't want to put their social on this document at the front end, that's okay. They can leave that blank, but by the time all of this gets complete and it's ready to be submitted by the sponsor to the State Department, that social's got to be on there, or they won't be able to process it for a license application. So we don't want to send in any incomplete documents. So please be careful to make sure everything is complete, verified, and checked before you move it on to the next step. Number 7 here says, did the applicant complete a pre-apprenticeship? The answer is universally no, because we don't have any pre-apprenticeships for teachers yet. Item number 8 is a voluntary disclosure of disability. One of the things that we have to do for every registered apprenticeship program is make sure that everybody who is applying or is an apprentice has the opportunity to disclose a disability if they have one. So this is not for them to disclose so that you are going and providing accommodations. This is statistical information, just like this stuff up here at the top about their race, gender, ethnicity. But here they are given an opportunity to disclose that in a private way. So that is a separate document. It looks like this, and it is called a voluntary disclosure of disability. At the application phase, you don't have to get one of these from everybody who's applying. You just have to make sure that everybody who's applying knows that they can fill it out, right? So that if you don't get one with the application, that's okay. Later on, once they become apprentices, our strong recommendation to the employer is that every person who is an apprentice fills one of these out. Now you say, well, it's voluntary, right? It's a voluntary disclosure. Once they become apprentices, it's voluntary for you to disclose, but it's not voluntary for you to fill the form out, because there's an option right here that says, I don't want to answer. That's fine. You don't have to answer. The apprentice doesn't have to answer, but we need to get one of these on paper for everybody. That's really just a CYA thing to get at least one of those on paper, so that everybody, you've at least got some documentation then that they know that they have the opportunity to apply. Something special about that disclosure is they have the opportunity to apply in an ongoing status, in an ongoing way. Today, right now, I don't have a disability that I would disclose, and I don't ever have to disclose what the disability is. I don't ever have to disclose, my specific condition. But I'm not going to say, if I filled out this form today, it would be, no, I don't have a disability. All right. But later today, I may hurt myself, or I may get into an accident, or 5 years from now, I get older or whatever, and I start to have a disability. I have an ongoing right to fill this out and change this at any time. So you just make sure that that stays available to the apprentice. All right. The second page of the part the apprentice fills out, this will probably look familiar to you employers. This is the direct copy and paste from the background check sections that you have to do for any teacher license. So employers, if you've got people that are getting into this and they haven't done it before, you will need to probably support your apprentice applicants in completing this, right? It's straightforward, but it is also confusing if you've not done it before. So I almost guarantee every local school system has got somebody that's in charge of handling background checks. Please let those apprentice applicants know, hey, when it's time to do this section, talk to Mrs. Smith over in HR. She can help you make sure you get your background check section filled out correctly. Again, we don't want to send in partial or incomplete or whatever applications and then just have them get back and forth trying to get them done. There is a place here for the applicant to sign, yep, everything that I have provided is true and accurate up to this point. All right, so that's part A. That's done by the apprentice or the apprentice applicant. Part B is handled at the related instruction provider. All right, so AUM is playing two roles. Remember, they're both the sponsor and the related instruction provider. So applicant John Brown fills out pages 1 and 2, does their background check stuff. They bring it and they say, hey, AUM, I'm interested in becoming an apprentice. Will you evaluate my transcript? And AUM says, yep. So this will be filled out, and this will all be in a fillable PDF. AUM will fill it out. Who evaluated it? AUM. When did they do it? For what job? Since we now have the option for secondary and elementary, this will be a drop-down list where you can choose secondary, elementary, and then what subject area. Particularly for your high school classes, this is important because you got to make sure that the journey worker you're going to is lined up with the thing that you're teaching. So if I want to be a math teacher as an apprentice, I can't be assigned to a journey worker who teaches science, right? Even if that person's certified for science, that doesn't matter. If I'm going for a math certificate, I got to be with a math qualified person who's teaching math classes. So what are the findings of that review? So I mentioned before, if you wanted to do an unofficial review like this, an apprentice could contact the school, contact the university, say, hey, Brooke, can you help me with this? What do you think? Am I in the ballpark? Should I go through this process? Yeah, it looks like you'd probably be okay. Go ahead and fill it out. Well, this is where the official review occurs as part of this application. So the university is going to look at a transcript, and they're going to decide part A, do you have sufficient transferable credit? And part B, can you get into our College of Education either already in or eligible to get in? If it's a yes in both boxes, then signed by the RTI provider, and that moves it forward. If it's a no, like you don't have enough credit or your GPA is too low or whatever, all that has to be done here is guidance has been made available to the applicant. in how to become eligible for future applications. That was something that our principals and superintendents really wanted to make sure we did. If somebody applies, we don't want it to just be, no, sorry, you can't get in. It's, no, sorry, you can't get in right now. Here's what you need to do to be eligible to apply for future cohorts, right? So it's a little bit of case management and guidance that we're asking for from the RTI provider. But we're going to assume that they got a yes in A and a yes in B. It gets signed by the related technical instruction provider. Big note right here in all caps. If they haven't already, they should be reminded immediately at that point, do your FAFSA, because we need to know if you're going to qualify for any kind of aid or any of that kind of stuff. Get on that FAFSA immediately. So let's say, yes, they got a check in A and B. They do qualify. Now that goes from the RTI provider, AUM, back to the employer. So now we're going to say, and this right here would not be AUM. This would be Laney School System or Phoenix City Public Schools or Russ County or whatever, right? It's going to be sent back to the employer, and we're asking the employer to fill out some information. They're going to evaluate the applicant's request. This is the place where the employer says, yes or no, I want this person to be an apprentice for me. Everybody who fills out the application and qualifies does not just automatically get to be an apprentice. It's the employer's decision who they want to have as an apprentice. So, maybe you can't afford to have 10 apprentices, so you're only going to do 2. Or maybe this person has applied, but they don't have a good track record with your school system, so you're not interested in investing local funds into supporting them. That's the employer's decision. But this is where you would record that decision. Item 3, the applicant is in good standing and is an employee with the LEA. We've already talked about that. They do have to be employed with you. Good standing is left up to the employer's determination. These items with asterisks beside them are not part of the determination if somebody can or can't be an apprentice, but they're information that we want to know so that we can tell where the apprentices are coming from. So how long have they been working there? What role are they currently in? Are they working with special ed right now? Are they working in Title I right now? And what's their current grade level responsibility? One thing that came up, a question about, we've talked a lot about parapros and teachers aides being the target audience for this program, but this program would work just as well for a secretary or a bookkeeper or somebody who has been going to school and wants to be a teacher. They've got that credit. If they're an employee in your school system and you want to make them into a teacher and they meet the qualifications, that's fine. It doesn't have to just be parapro or teacher's aide. They could be in some other kind of support role that you want them to move from that into teaching. And if that's the case, then you just mark other here and tell us, what that person was doing. This statement right here just says that the journey worker has to meet all the requirements that are spelled out in the Alabama Administrative Code. And those requirements are the exact same requirements as a person to be a intern supervisor. So we didn't add or take away anything from that. This next one here is the LEA identified a teacher with appropriate qualifications to serve as the journey worker for this. One of the biggest complaints that mentor teachers sometimes have is they just get assigned to be a mentor teacher and they've got enough to do, or they feel like they just can't handle it and they don't need that extra responsibility. We don't want that. So we want the local school system at this stage to go and say, yeah, I've got this person who's applying and they want to be a science teacher or whatever, and I'm going to talk to Mr. Smith, who is our science department chair, and see if he will be the journey worker for this person. So you can't just say, oh, yeah, I got a journey worker, no problem. You got to specifically tell us the name of that journey worker and the certificate number of that journey worker so we can check to make sure that they are qualified to do that supervision. As much as anything, this is about making sure that that person knows that they're being signed up to be this. There is a note here, and this will be a yes, no checkbox, but payment has been made for the application. There's no cost for the application to be an apprentice, but there is a cost related to applying for the teacher apprentice license. It is $38, and it's handled in the same way that you pay for any other kind of license. That application fee is the responsibility of the employer because we're not passing these costs on to the apprentice. So the payment has been made and you do that. The instructions are here, but you do that in the same way that school systems make payment for any other kind of certificate fees. Then item 12 here, signature of the superintendent says, yep, they are wanting this person to be an apprentice. So this one does have to be, it says superintendent or their authorized designee. All right, so just a real quick recap. Section A gets done by the apprentice. It gets transmitted with some help from the folks on the background check side. It gets transmitted to the RTI provider, which in this case is AUM. AUM does an evaluation of the transcript to determine if the person is or is not eligible. Then it goes to the employer. The employer determines if they do or don't want them to be an apprentice. And if that all of that gets done, and this is all yeses and checks, and everybody's happy with them, then it gets sent to the sponsor. So now it's going back to AUM. So don't be confused here, because remember, AUM's playing two roles. They got two hats on. So AUM already saw it one time when they evaluated the transcript. This will go back to them when it's completed as the sponsor. They'll look over it, make sure everything is all hunky-dory, and they will transmit the relevant information to the State Department in the educator certification section. There is a deadline to get all this done by August 1 so that they can have their teacher apprentice license in hand before school starts. There's some more discrimination information, non-discrimination information down here. This is a good place if you're looking for the specific language that you have to use for the non-discrimination clause. There's an easy place to get it. So all of this gets done, it gets transmitted, State Department issues a teacher apprentice license. Then the next step is the apprentice has to accept this placement, right? So you'll note all of this information up here at the top looks almost exactly like the application we just went over. That's because that's where we got the request for that information. This is filled out by the sponsor by putting the person into Rapids. Rapids is the database that manages registered apprentices. If you ever see one of these documents that is handwritten, it's not right. Sometimes people will get the PDF of this and they'll go fill it out by hand and then submit it that way. This would be auto-generated out of the database by the sponsor. So sponsor goes in, they fill in all this, demographic information. This stuff is filled in with the wage rate and the sponsor, and all this comes from the APA. All that's auto-generated. They will submit it to my office. They'll say, hey, we've got an apprentice applicant. They'll submit it to my office. We'll review it, make sure that it's complete and squared away. And then our signature will come in right here in signature block number 2 down here at the bottom, and it will be auto-filled. It'll be typed in. And then the only written signatures, the only written ink on this page will be in these boxes right here. It goes back to the apprentice. The apprentice has to sign it. The sponsor has to sign it, and the employer has to sign it. Really, these are kind of out of order. Normally what happens is the apprentice signs it, and the employer signs it, then they send it back to the sponsor. They sign it and upload it to Rapids. It's a clunky workflow. It's not ours. It's defined by the U.S. Department of Labor. We can't really change it, but it does work once we figure out, once you kind of get used to it, it's not that bad. And you only have to do this once right at the very beginning of the process. So just to reiterate, all of this document will be auto-filled by the sponsor when they put the person into the database. My office signature will be auto-filled out of the database when we approve it, and then ink signatures here. Now they can be digital or wet ink, whatever, but I just give you another caution. If you ever get one of these and you see it's hand-filled or typed in or whatever, that's not valid. Don't use it. Don't accept it. All right. And then we've already talked about this, but I'll just say it one more time. If you have not gotten, employers, if you have not gotten one of these by the time the apprentice does this, you've got to get it. All right. So get one. You do not need to scan that and email it to everybody. It needs to go into a locked cabinet there at the employer site. Even my office does not have the right to come and say, hey, show me apprentice Joe Blow's voluntary disclosure statement. You just got to get one and keep them on file. And the only thing that information will ever do, this answer, yes, no, or I don't want to answer, goes into the apprentice's record when they're uploaded into Rapids. So that's the review of the documents, which kind of lays out the process. I'm going to jump back into this. Just a few reminders, and we've talked about this. If you're going to be publishing applications, or if you're going to be saying, hey, we're seeking applicants or whatever, any written material about the apprenticeship program needs to include that discrimination clause, non-discrimination clause. So make sure you get that on there. It does have to be that specific one. There's an EEO poster that has to be displayed by the employers. This needs to be in a place where apprentices can see it. All it has is the same thing about the EEO opportunity, how to file a discrimination complaint, information for contact from my office. This can't be on the wall in the HR manager's office downtown, right? This has got to be in the school, in wherever the apprentice would have the opportunity to see it. So put it up in the break room or something like that at the school. It is important to reiterate, everybody who's related to the apprenticeship program has to have anti-harassment training. This does not have to be unique or different training than what your school system may already do as an employer. If you already do that, fine. You just need to let the university know that you already do it and probably provide some documentation. Say, yeah, we do it annually at Institute, every employee participates, whatever it is, so that the sponsor can be assured that that anti-harassment training has been done. A couple of notes about that training. Of course, the training has to communicate that the harassing conduct will not be tolerated, but it also has to be interactive. So saying that, we have an anti-harassment policy on page 12 of our employee handbook, that's not training. There's got to be some kind of interactive training that the apprentices and the journey workers and anybody else who's going to be supervising apprentices goes through. If you don't have that, if you don't have something that meets that, work with your sponsor. They have access to some things from the feds that we can give them, so you can do that. It's not difficult, but it needs to be done by everybody. There will be an apprentice onboarding. We will conduct one big one probably for every teacher apprentice in the state that will be pretty general. But you as an employer will also need to be onboarding your apprentices. Look, if everybody knows what to expect and knows what their responsibilities are, then they go into this with their eyes wide open and we get good outcomes. If people go in not really sure what they're signing up for or not really sure what they're supposed to do, then they get surprised or they don't know what's going on. And the gap between expectation and reality is called disappointment. So we want to avoid that, right? So we want to make sure everybody is fully briefed. My office will coordinate some apprentice onboarding to be done this summer, but in an ongoing fashion, you as an employer need to be prepared to do that. Talk to them about how you want to track the competencies, talk to them about their complaint procedures, etc. The apprentice reviews, to reiterate, these need to be conducted on a consistent periodic basis. What the period of that basis is up to the sponsor and the employer to work out. What's reasonable, right? Or what makes sense in line with their coursework that they're doing through the university. But they need to be done. You need to have feedback from the apprentice. Sometimes the sponsor and the employer will talk to each other and they'll kind of check in, but nobody bothers to talk to the apprentice to see how it's going for them. You definitely need to include the apprentice in those conversations because they'll be the one to tell you, hey, I'm drowning here, or this is going great, or if I could just change this one thing about the time, then this would be more convenient, whatever. Make sure you include the apprentice in those reviews. As far as the tracking goes, I mentioned that we have some software to do that. It's called WorkHands. We will train your journey workers and your apprentice as part of the onboarding that we'll conduct. We'll give them an overview of WorkHands. Essentially what this does is take that list of competencies and that list of classes and it dumps it into an app so that the apprentice can see on their phone, hey, these are the competencies that I need to be working on, and the journey worker can see them, and the apprentice can check off this week or this month, however often you tell them to do it, I worked on competency number 1, 12, and 14. And when they hit submit on that, it rolls up to their journey worker, and their journey worker looks at it and says, yes, in fact, you did work on these. And competency number 1 and 12, you were demonstrating fundamentals in. You're pretty good on those. But competency number 14, you still got to do some work. So I'm not marking you off on that yet. So it gives everybody a very clear visual representation of the progress of the apprentice, particularly on their OJL, but it also shows the coursework so that everybody knows right where you are when you do those check-ins. So a recap for employers, what do you need to do next? Assuming that you have already done your employer acceptance agreements. If you haven't done that yet, do that immediately. You need to do an employer acceptance agreement, get that over to the sponsor, let the sponsor sign it, send it to me, and that starts that process getting you in line for the funding. So assuming that part's been done, the next thing you need to do is start looking for potential apprentices. So advertise within your school system. We're investigating this program. We want to participate in this pilot. Are you interested? Do you think you would qualify? Here's the name of the contact person to talk to. And then once those people do start to come in and say, yeah, I want to do it, then you need to assist those candidates in submitting their applications, particularly the part about the background check that maybe it's not confusing to anybody else, but it's confusing to me. So make sure that you assist them in filling out their applications. We don't want incomplete or partial applications. Once they're all approved, you will be employers will need to do employer onboarding or apprentice onboarding. Again, we'll help you with that. You've got to be selecting your journey workers. So that really is kind of an ongoing thing, and it's simultaneous with your apprentices applying. So if you've got a science apprentice coming in, you need to be looking for a science journey worker. If you've got an elementary apprentice coming in, you need to be looking for an elementary journey worker. And then we'll do that employer onboarding for journey workers this summer, and then monitoring and reviewing progress in coordination with the sponsor. So that's something that goes on throughout the registered apprenticeship program. All right. So that is the outline, and Meredith or Brooke, if you will, if there's anything that I didn't cover or questions that I generated that we need to cover, let's get them on the record. Meredith, what I forget?
I can't remember if you addressed on the voluntary disability disclosure form, if they check yes, what to do about that. Did you talk about that today?
I might have, but I'll say it again. So that
Okay.
if you have an apprentice who checks yes, as an employer, what are you supposed to do? Nothing. You're supposed to file that document and notify the sponsor of the answer to that document so that they can put it into the database. If you want to mail the form to the sponsor, that's fine, but please don't scan and upload this to the Rapids database. And the reason Meredith points that out is sometimes people have the tendency to think, well, oh, this apprentice told me they have a disability. I should go talk to this apprentice and say, hey, I see you marked yes on this document. What's your disability? What kind of help do you need? Don't do that. Don't go ask them what their disability is. If they need to request accommodations, you just make sure that everybody, and this is just good in practice as an employer, everybody that works for you should know how to request accommodations in their workplace if they need them. But that is a different process than this document. So please, I know our tendency might be, oh, I see they said they have a disability. I want to be helpful. So I want to go talk to them about it and ask them. Don't do that. That's not the goal of that document. All right, Brooke.
Well, thank you, Josh, for laying out everything. It was very helpful for me as well to go back through that information again and just just to hear it again. So I
Mhm.
appreciate that. I do want to stress that the apprentice must also apply to the university, um, so that that document that you show, that's one piece of it, but then they must also apply to the institution. So so that's
Yep.
important, and that will give us an opportunity to collect the transcript and, any other information that we need to be able to do that transcript review. Um, and want to point out that the requirement for admission into the professional education program is a 2.5 GPA. And that's true for any of the institutions and any of the people in any of the programs across the state. That 2.5 GPA is a requirement for all. Um, I also wanted to just note that, we need great teachers, and the employers know the people in their school buildings. They know the folks who already have great rapport with students. And so I just encourage employers to encourage these individuals to become apprentices, because they're already in there. They already kind of see how the other side of the house works. So they would be prime candidates, especially if, like I say, if they have great rapport with students already, they know how to talk with parents. So these people are prime candidates for a program such as this.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'm glad you mentioned about applying. I do want to point out there is a landing page. It's alapprentice.org/teacher, and there's a specific page for AUM. You can go there to see a copy of the standards. The work process right now is only the one for secondary teacher, but I'm going to add the one for elementary today. The employer acceptance agreement draft, the application draft. The application will come from the sponsor. So employers, once you've done this AppD and you've got somebody who's ready, you request that application from the sponsor. That would be a good place to start that initial kind of informal conversation. Hey, I want to, does this person, are they in the ballpark? And get that application from them. And then also, here's the link that, like Brooke was talking about, we've got to get that College of Education application done. So there's the link that carries you to the College of Education page, so you can find out right there, apply now. All right. Also, this will be updated as new employers sign on, so folks will know local education agency and point of contact that are participating. So this is why we don't want the superintendent's address. We want the person who's really going to be, kind of the main POC for this. Okay. All right. Well, I don't have anything else. I think we've generally covered it. I appreciate y'all sticking around for a full 90 minutes today to learn about this. If you have any questions, reach out to my office. You can find our contact information on our webpage at alapprentice.org. Thank you very much.
Thank you.